Hello, everyone, and welcome to the special episode of my podcast. My name is Brenda, and I am in my third year of my bachelor's degree in international relations at King's College London. Today, I'm excited to share with you this inspiration and motivation behind my recent work for BizGs, which is my article titled From Conflict to Connection, Digital Peacemaking and the Transformation of FARC Women. I believe that this internship was a great complement for my degree, as it gave me insights into the consequences of conflicts that are often overlooked in more traditional international relations academia. As part of my course, I usually find that we study conflict from a macro level of analysis. This means that when we analyze conflict, we often consider its repercussions for the state, military institutions, and the state's economy. We often focus on how conflict, or lack of it, shapes relationships between states and how this can be used to predict certain patterns of behavior in international relations. So, really, this background of mine from studying IR from a state and international level of analysis allowed me to understand the complexity embedded in an international system which has several kinds of states and non-state actors. These would be, for example, nation states, international organizations, terrorist groups, multinational corporations, NGOs, transnational crime groups, and so on. But two main factors in IR often go neglected. First, it would be the role of the individual in international politics. And second, we often neglect how the rise of communication technologies are shaping political movements and altering the course of international phenomena such as conflict resolution and peacemaking processes. These two aspects are really what are highlighted in BizG's platform, and I thought that the case study of FARC women in the 2016 peace process negotiations really gave a voice to those two aspects pretty well. Given this, I'd like to start exploring the broader context of FARC and how it originated, to give a little bit of a background as to why this group symbolizes a significant case study for peacemaking and digital peacemaking. This will complement my article and provide some insights into the complexity of the peace negotiation process in Colombia. FARC. So to start with, FARC, or the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, was founded in 1964 as a Marxist-Leninist guerrilla movement. Its origins can be traced back to the period known as La Violencia in Colombia, which was a decade of civil conflict between the liberal and conservative parties. The FARC really emerged from a communist self-defense group and peasant movements in Colombia, originally positioned itself as a revolutionary force fighting for social justice and political reform. It was originally meant to be the voice of those who lived in rural areas and were often neglected by the Colombian authorities. Over the decades, though, FARC grew to become the largest and most powerful guerrilla group in Colombia, and indeed one of the most significant insurgent movements in Latin America. At its peak, it was estimated to have around 18,000 active combatants and controlled various territories in Colombia, particularly in rural areas. So, FARC's activity had a profound and often devastating impact on Colombian society. I do touch on some of these factors in my article, which would be the fact that the organization was involved in armed confrontations with government forces. They used kidnappings to ask for ransom to kind of finance their operations. They are accused of having forced recruitment, especially of minors and children. There's also their involvement in the drug trade, especially when it comes to cocaine production and trafficking, and the overall attacks on civilian population and infrastructure. These actions, of course, resulted in thousands of deaths, displacements, and it contributed to having a general climate of fear and instability that has really affected Colombia for decades before the peace negotiations began. I think FARC's operations as well had a great significance to South American politics, which is something I want to mention. So their influence extended beyond Colombia's borders, making a significant factor in South American politics, especially when it comes to certain factors like regional security, because the FARC's activities really often spilled over into neighboring countries like Ecuador and Venezuela. It created tensions and security concerns across the South American region. There's also the ideological influence. So, as one of the longest surviving Marxist guerrilla movements, FARC often served as an inspiration for other left-wing groups across South America, especially if we consider during the Cold War years. And of course, the third factor that I want to mention would be the drug trade, which FARC's involvement in the cocaine trade had far-reaching implications for the entire continent, affecting, of course, international relations, economic policies, and anti-drug trafficking efforts. Because of this, I believe that FARC provides an example of how much gang violence and social inequality permeates throughout South America in general. Connected to this, on a more personal note about my background, I am Brazilian. I was born and I grew up in Brazil. So I consider myself a South American, let's say. And even though, of course, there are cultural differences and political distinctiveness into how Colombian government works and the Brazilian government works, I think that the reasons I mentioned previously really show how the themes of social injustice, poverty, drug trade, and gang violence are political issues that are really pertinent to the security agenda of South American countries in general. And I think, especially when we see political challenges from an individual perspective, so especially my own analysis of the issue, I really empathize with the initial skepticism that Colombian locals had when the peace process negotiations began. I touch a little bit on this on my article because I kind of said how, because crime organizations are so common in South American countries, it's not unheard of for you to know someone, or for someone who knows someone who has somehow been impacted by gang violence or drug trafficking. And I remember around 2014, when the peace process negotiations first started and the news started covering these negotiations, I was in high school. I was a high school student in Brazil. But I remember how much Brazilians watched these negotiations unfold and thought how these peace negotiations shouldn't be happening. It shouldn't be a thing, because they compared it to negotiating with terrorists. So they really, even though people understood that this was a group that had a background of fighting against poverty and for social injustice, they kind of over the years became a criminal enterprise almost, and it's so-called terrorist group because of their associations with the drug trade and targeted violence. And of course, because of that, it resulted in a lot of deaths and has impacted generations worth of Colombian locals. So there is that kind of generational aspect to it. So I think that because of this, because of my background and where I'm from, even though I can't speak for all of Colombian people, of course, and I can't speak for all of South Americans in general, I think that this allowed me to experience firsthand this contrast that there was between two different groups. On one hand, you had experts, political experts, conflict resolution experts, saying that even though it would be difficult, that the peace process negotiations in Colombia was what was best for Colombian political stability for the long term. These were what the experts were saying. But on the other hand, I can also relate to how much fear as well the locals had about these negotiations, because they thought that this would just increase the levels of violence and would legitimize a terrorist group, and that they would still suffer from that pain and that constant fear and them knowing loved ones who are taken away or killed or getting involved in the drug trade because of FARC, essentially. So especially this ambiguity in this case of the benefits of peace process, but also the pain inflicted on individuals on the individual level of analysis, like I was talking about previously. I think it was this contrast which really initially drew me to this case and why I chose to do this specific topic. So when I started researching more and more about this case study, what really captured my imagination was really the emergence of digital peacemaking as part of this peace process. First, the Colombian government's attempt to use an app and to create an app to really engage citizens in the peace talks was a very innovative approach. Although it wasn't entirely successful due to public mistrust, as I mentioned in my article, it really opened my eyes to the potential of technology in conflict resolution. But the real breakthrough in this article, as I was doing my research, came from an unexpected source, which was FARC women themselves. Their use of social media, especially Twitter, to document their participation in peace talks and to advocate for gender equality within FARC and in the post-conflict Colombian society in general, was really something unheard of, at least for me. The case study of FARC women, as I argue in my article, really teaches us a lesson on digital diplomacy, gender-centered approaches to peace building, and also they give us an insight into the reintegration challenges in post-conflict communities. As we look to the future of South American politics, the lessons from the Colombian peace process and the transformation of FARC women will undoubtedly continue to resonate. They offer both hope and caution. Hope that even the most complex conflicts can find peaceful resolutions, but they also advise caution that the road to lasting peace is very long and complex. I think that for students of IR like myself, and really for anyone interested in either peace studies or Latin American politics, the Colombian case of the 2016 peace negotiations provides a rich field for research and reflection. It really reminds us of the importance of inclusive approaches to peace building and the potential for transformation, even in the most challenging circumstances. As I conclude thoughts on this topic, I'm really left with a sense of cautious optimism. The case of FARC women and digital peacemaking shows us the potential for transformation and the power of digital tools for conflict resolution. However, it also reminds us that peace is a long-term process that requires ongoing commitment and effort. That's it. I hope you guys enjoyed my article.